Hello and welcome to another episode of the lecture series of environmental science, which we are trying to comprehensively cover for civil services examination. So, today's topic in the series is ecological succession. What is ecological succession and what are the different terms associated with it? Let us see through this video. Okay, ecological succession, simply put, is process of changing of community of species over time. When a group of species is changed and it transforms over a period of time, that is said to be succession. There are various terms associated with it, that are succession, primary and secondary succession, autogenic and allogenic succession, and at the end of the video we will have a practice question. So let us dive into the lecture and see what are these different terms and what are the meanings of the various terms. Okay, now as and when the life started and it evolved through various phases, now we see the forests surrounding us. When we see that what we have surrounding us, there are group group of forests around us. But was this the case since the beginning? No. That is how the various phases, various species evolved over the years to be what they are now. So when the earth evolved and when the life happened, when the life started at earth, then there were bare rocks initially. Okay, then some bacteria and some fungus and some microscopic organisms took its course, and then they colonized over the bare rocks. We can see that in this picture some microscopic organisms and species such as moss and lichens, these are found on the rocks. They colonized and they made their habitat over the rocks, and that is how the life evolved. Now when mosses and lichens they took habitat over the rocks, they released oxalic acid with it. Now what did oxalic acid do? Oxalic acid, it actually helped in weathering of rocks. Okay, now if you have studied geography, you must know that if this is a rock, then it goes on to form smaller particles and at the end very small granules, and this is what is soil. So the oxalic acid released by the moss and lichens, which took its habitat over the rocks, that gives rise to forming of soil. And when soil is formed, it gradually gives its way to produce grasses over it, and then gradually shrubs and small trees take its place, and eventually what we see is forest. So this is a basic overview of how the succession, ecological succession takes place, and we'll see that in greater depth in coming slides. Now initially this is the ecological succession what we talked about. This is the in the last slide the overview we talked about. This is the actual ecological succession. In this diagram you can see. Now the bare rocks is one of a surface, one of its kind. Now at the initial stage there are two types of surfaces. Here it is said that xerarch and hydrarch, these are the two types of surfaces which are present at the initial stage. Now what does this mean? Now hydrarch is the surface where there is enough amount of water present, such as ponds, lakes. These are the places where there is enough water present. And xerarch is where there is scarce amount of water. So these are the initial surfaces present, and over those various kinds of microorganisms form their habitat, they colonize that place, and likewise the gradual succession takes place. Here we can see that what we talked about in the last slide, the bare rocks, which is obviously a xerarch surface, and then mosses and lichens colonize it, it gives way to grass, and then bushes, short trees, small trees, shrubs, and then eventually to forest. Now there is a scientific term to this. Now pioneer in formal language means that it starts. Pioneer is the one who starts something. So bacteria, fungus, moss, and lichen, in this case, they start the ecological succession. They actually offset the ecological succession. Now when they gradually move forward, the grasses, the bushes, and small trees take place of it as they succeed eventually, and those kind of species are said to be serial species. And then what we see at the end is forest, and that forest climax, in the formal language it means final, and that is the case in the environment science as well. The climax species is forest, and climax is the final species of any ecological succession. So that was all about various terms of ecological succession. We'll see that in greater depth about succession, various aspects of succession. Now, what is the relation of succession with productivity, and what is the relation of succession with nutrients? Let us understand. Now, let us consider this is a surface, alright, and when the pioneer species take place, such as mosses and lichens, these are the pioneer species. They grow above the surface, right? They take place above the surface. When the grasses, they have small roots, then small trees, they have a bit bigger roots, and then there is forest canopy, they have even deeper roots. So this is the climax species. Okay, so now as we see that the roots, upon succession, the depth of roots keeps on increasing. It was null here, then a little bit here, then it increased here, and it came to its max value at the climax species. Now roots, if you know, roots do the work of absorbing water from the soil and absorbing nutrients. Now as and when the roots go deeper and deeper, the availability of nutrients to the soil, it increases naturally, because the roots go to greater depths, and as a result it can fetch more amount of water and more amount of nutrients as well. Alright, so water and nutrient are directly proportional. More the water, more the nutrients are directly proportional to the productivity, and as a result the productivity increases as the succession keeps on going from pioneer species to climax species. The succession, the productivity actually increases that, and the availability of nutrients is increased, and so is the productivity. So this was the relation between succession and productivity of the species. Moving forward, we had something about primary and secondary succession. So what is primary and secondary succession? We'll understand that, but before that, let me present a case study before you. Let me give you a case where this is Tapu, and he belongs to a middle class family, and this guy is son of one of India's richest man, Mr. Ambani, and he is Mr. Anant Ambani. Okay, so why are we talking about them? Let us see. Now both of these have been given a task to raise a startup. Okay, both of these have been given a task to raise a startup, and for that they obviously have to talk to investors, so that investors become interested in funding their startup. Alright, now comparing these two, Tapu, who belongs to a middle class family, he will have obviously lesser number of contacts and lesser investors as compared to Mr. Ambani, because he obviously has a generational wealth, and he is a son of a well established industrialist. So that is why naturally he must be having more amount of contacts, right? So it will be far easier for this guy to actually get an investment and to fund his startup as compared to Tapu, who is a middle class boy. And that is why it will be easier for Mr. Ambani to fund his startup as compared to Tapu. Now, what are we talking about this? Now, let us extrapolate this particular knowledge into the concept of primary and secondary succession. Now, as we in previous slides, in this slide, we talked about how succession is directly proportional to the productivity, and how as and when succession proceeds, the productivity increases, and so does the availability of nutrients. Now, talking about this, now in primary succession versus secondary succession. Now let us understand, let us extrapolate the case of Tapu versus Ambani in starting in raising a startup in this particular case. Now, what is primary succession? Primary succession is that where the succession starts from the bare surface. It can be hierarch or xerox, and secondary it starts from the after destruction of a habitat, right? It is actually rejuvenation. So secondary succession is nothing but rejuvenation, but primary succession, it is what it takes place on bare surface. So this primary succession, it takes place on bare surface, while secondary succession, it does not take place on bare surface. It actually takes place after the destruction of habitat, and rejuvenation takes place. So naturally in bare surface there were no previous roots, right? No previous roots available, but here previous roots were available. So comparing this with the previous case study, we have this roots presence of roots due to the previous habitat. So these roots have created nutrient availability, similar to Mr. Ambani's case, as his dad's contacts helped him get investors. Similarly, the previous roots helped the soil, the surface, to get nutrient availability, and as a result, the succession in this as compared to this, because there were no roots, and as a result nutrients are not present here previously, similar to case of Tapu. So no nutrients are present here. So that is why the nutrients availability is directly proportional to higher productivity, as we discussed previously, and as a result the secondary succession grows faster than that of primary succession. So primary succession takes place slowly and secondary succession takes place faster, and that this we can compare from the previous case study, and that is why I told you about the case study. And this is the difference between the primary versus secondary succession. I hope I am clear with this, and I hope I have clarified the concept. Now moving on, we talked about this, and now we have region of occurrence. We talked now itself that there is bare surface versus rejuvenation. So we are very clear with that. Now, why does habitat destruction take place? Actually there are two kinds of reasons. We'll see that here. Now there is two types of succession. It is said to be autogenic versus allogenic succession. Now what is autogenic and allogenic succession? We'll understand that by this technique, that is breaking down terms. Autogenic, break down this auto and genic. Genic means genesis of something, that is production of something, and auto means on its own. So autogenic basically means that the destruction caused due to factors in its own habitat. Okay, what does it mean? The previously available factors, for example some animals or something like that, which was present in its own habitat, and gave that led to the destruction, that is said to be autogenic succession. And succession, because secondary succession will take place after the destruction, that we already saw what is secondary succession, and secondary succession will take place after the destruction takes place. Now, what is allogenic succession? Allogenic succession is where the external factors, these give rise to the destruction. For example wind, for example fire, for example water. So factors like these, which are not present directly at the habitat, but these are the external factors, and those give rise to the destruction. And after the destruction, the secondary succession takes place, and that kind of secondary succession is said to be allogenic succession, because that is caused after the destruction of habitat by the external factors. And this is the difference between autogenic and allogenic succession. Now growth and CO2, that is altogether a different topic, but I will present this in short, that CO2 is directly proportional to productivity of a plant. Now if there is more CO2, growth will be higher, and that is said to be fertilization by carbon dioxide. So in nutshell, it is carbon fertilization. We'll see that in greater depth in later videos, but for the time being this is the case. So this destruction of habitat is, there is mainly the reason is human interference, that is anthropogenic factors such as global warming, such as soil erosions, and bringing invasive alien species. What is invasive alien species? We'll see that in greater depth in later videos. But for example eucalyptus, which is Nilgiri. So Nilgiri is one of the invasive alien species, and these factors actually contribute to the destruction of habitat, and this is human interference is one of the major reasons of why the destruction of habitat takes place. So this all was related to the succession, and to the concept of succession it all related, and we have covered that in greater depth, and so that you can tackle any question which relates to this. And yeah, this is the complete explanation of the topic. And at the end of the video you have a question coming up, and I hope you pause the video and then solve the question. And if you like my explanation, please give a thumbs up, do like, share and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next videos. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.